Good evening, esteemed members of the profession, and welcome to session 2 of our 3-part webinar series on the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy. If you can kindly type in on the chat where you're joining us from, as we await more of our colleagues to be able to join us. I am very glad to see so many of you join out this evening. Karibu sana, Brian Mabui. Where are you joining us from? Karibu Brian from Thika. Emmanuel from Nairobi, welcome very much. Tom from Thika. We have Charles from Diaspora in the UK. Karibu Kennedy all the way from Dadaab. And Dr. Frederick Githinji from Kitengela. We have Susan from Texas. Dr. Rabera Kenyanya from Naivasha. Welcome everyone. We shall be starting in the next 3 minutes so that we allow more people to join in. Karibu sana Dr. Steve from Kiambu. Maiko from Makueni. Dr. Iwak from Naivasha. Dr. Yego from Kericho. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Karibu Dr. Yego from Kericho. And as you keep joining in, I would like to encourage each one and every one of you to go ahead on the PPB portal and subscribe to this session before we start. Karibu sana Shaher Ahmed, a pharmacist from Comoros. Karibu Dr. Susan Mutua from Nairobi. We have Dr. Alex Okaru from the University of Nairobi. Dr. Agarwal from Eldoret. Karibuni sana. A quick reminder that this is the second session in a series of 3. And you are encouraged to subscribe to all the 3 sessions on the PPB portal. Today's session will focus on the evaluation of the KNPP. We'll be diving into the key findings and exploring how effectively the policy was implemented. And before we begin, just a few ground rules. Thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate your participation. You will be muted during the entire course of this session, and you are encouraged to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen so that whenever you have any questions, kindly use the Q&A tab for all the questions. And once again, if you have not subscribed on the PPB portal, search for the keyword KNPP and subscribe to all 3 sessions. Today's session will be recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube page. For those who missed session 1, that one was also recorded and it will be made available. So as you can see, the events are on the PPB portal. Kindly ensure you subscribe, search for the keyword KNPP. This ensures that you're able to get your CPD points in time. We shall be having a fantastic panel lined up for you. We have Dr. Nancy. So at this point, I would like to invite Dr. Nancy Njeru, who will take over.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, colleagues. Mine is not an opening remarks, but to welcome you very much to the second session. In this second session on the dissemination of the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy 2012, our head of directorate of HPT at the Ministry of Health will be taking us through the session. And karibu sana Director Menge to make your presentation.
So, good morning, colleagues.
Evening, Daktari.
So thank you very much for joining us. I believe that my screen is visible to all of us and that my audio is audible? Nancy, kindly confirm that on behalf of the participants.
Yes, I can hear you clearly, Director.
Thank you very much. So I welcome you all to this session today. It's a rather ambitious presentation that I'll be doing, and hopefully we can be able to wrap it up in the next 40 or 45 minutes to give an opportunity for us to have an interactive session of questions and answers. The reference that you're making to is the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy, a cabinet session paper number 4 that was approved in 2012. And today's session will basically be having a deep dive into the evaluation findings of the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy. Just as was shared last week, we went through a process where we had a committee that was appointed by the Ministry of Health. And the committee had a very clear mandate to, first of all, establish the process that they would go in the review of the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy, and also be the one answerable in reporting back to the appointing authority on the process that was made. This was made possible by support from the Africa Resource Center, a partner that we work with closely at the Directorate of Health Products and Technologies, who facilitated the first session that was a situation analysis. Basically, we did the situation analysis to find out how well was the policy implemented. The activity we are doing right now is dissemination of the report, and this is the first of many disseminations that we are finding. But what we are hoping to do is to sort of like look at what we found out in the process of the review, and also to appraise the participants on the implementation status as was found out during the situation analysis. We also hope that we will use this opportunity to engage extensively on challenges that are facing not only the pharmaceutical sector, but the HPT subsector that extends beyond pharmaceuticals. We also want to bring us all on board on what is the normal process of public policy making process, and then also get your feedback on what would be the best way to go forward in the next stage. We have divided these sessions into 3. And the first session that was led by Dr. Njeru really focused about what the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy was. And also she took us through sessions that were able to help us understand how our policies put in place, and also how our, what is the policy environment within Kenya? Where did we start from? And how are we proceeding? Today's session.
Hello, Dr. Menge. Would you kindly put the presentation on slide 2?
Sorry about that. As far as I'm concerned, I'm actually on slideshow. Let me stop the share and restart it again. Can you be able to see that?
It's not yet on slideshow, maybe.
Are you able to see the slideshow now?
Oh, okay. Kiprono can confirm. Maybe.
Nancy, can you confirm that you can see my slideshow?
From my side, it's not on slideshow, and it's not moving. It's on the first page.
Is it moving now?
Not yet from my side. But one of the participants are saying it was okay and it was on slideshow. Maybe to some people.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share and I'll set it up again.
Okay. It
Kindly
is now.
confirm
Yes,
on
it
the
is.
slide. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So you'll allow me to go and then so we've seen the objectives, we've talked about understanding the policy environment and talked about the 3 sessions that are planned. I kindly confirm, Nancy, that we are on the slide that starts with the for better understanding.
Yes, on my
Okay.
side, although in the chat I can see there are participants who are saying not yet. Perhaps another person can confirm for purposes of validating.
I can confirm it's okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Confirmed, Daktari.
Okay, as I was saying that the second session today will actually go to understand what were the key evaluation findings. And this session will be possibly as long as the session that we had last week. And then the next session, which I believe is going to be on Thursday, we'll be able to get a lot of the feedback from the members on what are the key considerations, especially as we're going ahead to perform the review. So the first session really talked about the introduction, the history of public policy environment for the pharmaceutical industry. We looked through the time when we had no policy to the time when we had what we call the Kenya Drug Policy and how it gave rise to the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy 2012. We also delved into what are some of the things we found out, including the fact that the KNPP 2012 did not give us an opportunity for monitoring. And also, we talked about how we went about the evaluation process and had a snippet into the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy Evaluation Report findings. In today's session, and you can see it's a very ambitious session because there are very many slides that we have to go through. We are going to, first of all, just share with members how did we opt to evaluate the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy? What was our method of scoring to determine performance? And then we are going to go through each of the 12 pillars with a summary on how that was able to show how each pillar was implemented. And then we'll spend quite a lot of time into looking at every pillar to discuss the various areas that we felt had been implemented, and also what feedback did we get from the key informants that we interviewed during this time, and the recommendations that came as a result. So kindly allow me to go straight into the presentation. And as we had said earlier, the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy 2012 had 12 main pillars. And each of the pillars had very many interventions. Some of them had as many as 14 to 17 interventions. And therefore, in terms of a normal policy, a policy is supposed to be a very brief document, but we were challenged by having a policy that had very many interventions. And in our overall evaluation, that could have been a reason why the implementation may not have been very good because of the number of interventions that were there. Our rating criteria was we looked at each of the interventions and we did a comprehensive desk review. And then later on, I got to do some key informant interview. Now, just going back to something that Nancy mentioned last week, a desk review confirms whether independently you can find evidence of something having been done without knowledge. Is it published? Is there a document you can find from the Kenya government documents? Is there a public document that you can be able to assess and determine whether a specific intervention has been done. And for anything that we're able to determine that it was fully achieved, we gave it a score of 1. If something was not fully achieved or was in progress, we gave it a score of 0.5. And if there was no evidence that it was done, then we gave it a score of 0. The key informant interviews built up on the desk review that we did with the idea that there are some key people who were tasked with various responsibilities in the KNPP who may be having additional information that we may not get from a desk review. And therefore, for the key informants, they were able to also lead us to some either policies or decisions that had been made that we could then consider that build up on the implementation status of the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy. I'll very briefly go through what were our findings. And as I said again, the first pillar had 6 interventions. And in our observations, we realized that 2 of the implementation, 2 were implemented, 2 were in progress, and 4 had not commenced. And therefore, we were able to give it an implementation rate of about 17%. Now, we made the situation analysis report available to you, and you can be able to look at the details of that. Now, if you look at the second pillar, it had 11 interventions. And when you have a single pillar having 11 interventions, then it is very possible that the implementation rate can actually be reduced. The third pillar was an expanding availability of essential medicines, and possibly it's one of the pillars that was implemented very well. It had a 50% implementation of the 10 interventions that were there and that you're going to see shortly. 3 were fully implemented, 4 are in progress of being implemented, and 3 are not commenced. And we'll dive deeply into each of these so that you can be able to have an understanding of where we were in each of these. In expanding local manufacturing, which was the 4th pillar, we had 6 interventions, and there are some interventions which you realize that the best way to evaluate them was to separate them because some of them had components that were clearly different. There were also others, like in pillar 4, you'll realize that there are some interventions that we did not evaluate because it was the same intervention that is repeated in another pillar, and it was going to give us an obscure status of implementation, and therefore we opted not to score it. Now, let me just also point out that this process of scoring was not only done by the consultant, but it was subjected to the implementation committee that had been appointed, so that it was a consensus that this particular pillar, we agree with the scoring or we do not agree with the scoring. Pillar 5 was on improving affordability of essential medicines, and it had been implemented relatively well at 47%. There were 14 interventions, and you realize that that actually gives a challenge on how you're able to look at it. The 6th pillar was on promoting appropriate medicine use. It was also at 50%, and the 7th pillar was on pharmaceutical research and development, and it was scored at 58%. You'll realize then that a lot of the emphasis in the pharmaceutical policy was centered around pillar 4, 5, and 6, because that is what most pharmacists understand their work to be. Pillar 8 was on ICT, and one of the things we realized that the implementation status possibly of pillar 8 was very, very high, because from the time that the KNPP was launched to the time that it was evaluated, there had been a lot of movements, and specifically the wording of the implementation or interventions allowed us to be able to see that a lot of progress had been made in that area. Pillar 9 was on human resource, and we'll be able to look at the 11 interventions and how they were done. Pillar 10 was on promoting access and safeguarding public health in pharmaceutical trade. We'll be able to see again how the 8 interventions had been scored. The next pillar, 11, was not determined, and I think this was made reference to last week, because in the process, it talked about enhancing access to vet medicines. You'll appreciate that before 2015, All vet products were being regulated by the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, but a decision was made in 2015 during the implementation process of this specific policy that the Kenya Veterinary Board will be able to regulate the veterinary products, and therefore it was not possible for us to effectively evaluate this, and we made a decision to drop it. On financing of essential pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical services, there were 7 interventions, of which 2 were fully implemented and 5 were in progress. Now, the next slides that I'm going into, we look at each of these pillars, and I just ask us to be patient because this is going to be a very, very long process of looking at it. But we really did feel that for purposes of the meeting we are having today, it's important that all of us have a clear understanding on how well the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy had been implemented, and therefore we call this a deep dive into it. So what is the implementation status of the more than 50 interventions that we hoped to implement? We'll go to the first pillar. And the first pillar talked about revamping pharmaceutical sector governance and policy direction. And as I mentioned earlier, there were close to 7 interventions in this specific pillar. And I'd like you to just look at how some of these were able to read. The first intervention in KNPP 2012 looked at establishing a Directorate of Pharmaceutical Services. Now, you'll allow me to just delve into a bit of depth in how we did this so that you can be able to understand then when we go to the other pillars, how easy or how difficult it was to evaluate. Now, from the desk review and from the key informant interviews, we realized that the specific intervention talked about establishing a Directorate of Pharmaceutical Services or its equivalent. Now, we've had a lot of changes during this time, and the reason we looked at it as not being done, although we've said there or its equivalent, it was very, very clear that it was a Directorate of Pharmaceutical Services that was to be established. And we've seen a lot of movement. Before devolution, the pharmacy was a department that was at level 4 in the MOH organogram. After devolution, it was removed from MOH for 7 years. So there was no Directorate of Pharmaceutical Services between 2013 and 2019. And that can be seen from literature. In 2019, it was brought in back as a division of health products and technologies, which was at level 6 at the ministry. And then by March last year, the division was elevated to a directorate that was again put at level 4 of the Ministry of Health organogram. And where level 1 is the minister's level, level 2 is going to be the PSS level, level 3 is at the level of the Director General, and thereafter we have the Directorate of Health Products and Technologies. Now, later on, you're going to see why then do we consider it not done? Are we able to look from literature and determine that there's a Directorate of Pharmaceutical Services? And the answer was no. But the policy did not strictly look at something that could be at the HPT level. And a lot of people felt that maybe we've lost in not having a Directorate of Pharmaceutical Services. If you look at the second intervention, is about the review of the schemes of service for pharmaceutical personnel. But again, it says to recognize specialization. So has specialization been recognized? Yes, the schemes have been reviewed and approved by the Public Service Commission, but the wording of this specific intervention was to the end of recognizing specialization. And you realize that it actually came short of recognizing specialization, and we'll continue so that you can be able to see some of the challenges we've had. Look at the third intervention. It starts with the word encourage. Now, how do you measure encouragement? So the intervention was definitely not smart. So it was to encourage the development of requisite human resource capacity to address current and emerging pharmaceutical sector needs. Now, when you look at various reports that are in the public realm, you realize that first of all, the number of pharmaceutical personnel has increased by 129%, from 6,700 in 2010 to over 15,000 in 2020. So the issue of the human resource capacity has been done. The scope of specialization courses has increased. But if you look at areas like product development, manufacturing using advanced technology, and so on, or the pre-service institutions aligning to the market needs, there are things that are happening but have not gone. Our greatest problem with this specific intervention was the word encourage. The next one was also very difficult for us because it talked about restructuring the PPB to establish a FDA as an autonomous national regulatory agency. And you'll realize that when a policy is so prescriptive, where it has predetermined that the success of this intervention was the presence of an FDA. It did not talk about a regulatory agency, but it specifically talked of a Food and Drugs Authority. Then it becomes very difficult for us to evaluate. Now, it also talked about autonomy. And if you look at the PPB today, does it have adequate autonomy? Whereas it has been established as a body corporate, it continues to operate with staff seconded from the Ministry of Health. And we did feel then that for purposes of evaluating this policy, we'll consider that the wording allowed us to consider that it's not done. The next two interventions talked about KEMSA and the National Quality Control Lab. And whereas there's been a lot of progress in KEMSA, but we still have issues of operational and financial autonomy. So when you're doing the key informant interviews, you then are able to talk to the board and the management in KEMSA and ask them the question, do you feel that you are an autonomous body corporate? So whereas the act has been established, but you find that operational and financial autonomy had not been achieved, and therefore we're able to score it as being in progress. National Quality Control Labs, I think we all know the status, that its board is still appointed by the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, and its staff are posted by the Ministry of Health, and therefore we're able to determine that that is not an autonomous body. So that is how we score the pillars, and therefore we come to the end of the first pillar. And I will be a bit faster for the other pillars because we've gotten how we're able to do this. The second pillar talked about strengthening pharmaceutical sector regulation. And this is one of the places we had a challenge because the interventions all refer to the Food and Drug Authority. All products marketed in Kenya must be duly registered by the Food and Drug Authority. Now, when you're making a policy, it cannot be prescriptive all the way to a name, and that becomes a challenge. If a policy is so descriptive that it wants this particular agency to be in place, then its ability to be considered very well done actually reduces. And there are a lot of implementation descriptions that have been done, but the bottom line is that the FDA that was supposed to implement that had not been established, and we considered that this is in progress. The issue of scheduling medicines that needed to be reviewed and regularly updated and enforced, and also be able to be prescriptive about the appropriate levels of control of medicines in prescribing, dispensing, and use based on either the pharmacological and safety profile, you'll actually agree that that has not been done as envisioned in the KNPP. In that pillar, we also had issues about registered projects that will require renewal of registration every 5 years. Right now, first of all, it prescribed that is the FDA that may register or deregister. But when we looked at the provisions in Cap 244, registration is done once and retention is done annually. That is not what was prescribed in the KNPP, and therefore it's scored as 0. Premises where medicines are stored, distributed, and dispensed must be licensed. Again, when you look in literature, you realize that the board spends quite a lot of time in cracking down unlicensed pharmacies. And therefore, we are able to note that medicines are not necessarily stored, distributed, and dispensed in licensed premises only, but that is a work that is in progress because the regulator is working towards ensuring that that is done. The issue about only personnel registered or enrolled by the Pharmacy Council, again, will be authorized to manage and dispense medicine. Again, that was a prescriptive intervention because do we have a council? Possibly the functions are being done by PPB, and we are able to see from a lot of reports that the crackdown is mainly against unregistered or unenrolled people who are in the private sector, and they are doing a lot of work. So it was considered as an intervention that is not done. The 6th and 7th intervention, or the 6th intervention was divided into A and B, where it talked about pharmaceutical inspectorate functions being consolidated, again under the FDA. So again, an opportunity where the FDA was viewed by the policy as the only organ that was able to do inspection, and only inspectors designated by the FDA, and we'll have it in our discussion later on, were the ones to inspect the premises. That is still at a place where it is not done. Clinical trials, we really felt that this is something that has happened because progress has been made in incorporating clinical trials in CAP 244 with the amendments that have come up. There are guidelines on clinical trials that were developed, and there is evidence to show that 60% of the clinical trials have been registered and monitored, with the 50% having been compliant with the clinical guidelines. Again, that's information you can get from a desk review, and therefore we scored that has already been done. The issue of cosmetics, there is progress that has been made because if you look at the changes that have happened with the CAP 244, first of all, there is a definition of what a cosmetic is. And then the requirements for the safety of cosmetic products was published by KEBS. And then cosmetics and their devices have been included in various amendments of CAP 244, but there are certain items that possibly have not been done, and we still do not have a lot of guidelines on cosmetics, but there was no evidence of that, but we consider that that is in progress. Pharmaceuticals for vet use, I think I made a reference to it. The vet products regulations of 2011, I basically removed that function, and therefore we're not able to score it, or we scored it as not being done. Again, this pillar had very many interventions. Again, it's prescriptive to the FDA that will collaborate with other regulators and law enforcement agencies to participate in harmonization, reciprocal arrangements for enhancing pharmaceutical regulation and control. There was evidence that there is collaboration between our regulator and other enforcement agencies and other regulators, not only within Kenya, but also within the region. And therefore, we considered that is in progress. One of the interventions in strengthening the pharmaceutical sector regulation was the issue of addressing conflict of interest in the pharmaceutical regulatory decision making. And there was evidence that the office of the CEO at PPB and the chief pharmacist at MOH were actually made as distinct functions, and that function had been done, and we scored it as done. We also looked at the issue of handling complaints and disputes and disciplinary issues. PPB has a disciplinary mechanism in place, and we considered that specific one had already been done. That ended the second pillar. And I mentioned earlier in my presentation that if you look at the interventions that were done from pillar 4, 5, and 6, that seems to be where most of us pharmacists understand that that is where our work is. On the third pillar on expanding availability of essential medicine, one of the interventions was integrating and harmonizing existing public sector parallel procurement activities to optimize the procurement efficiencies and effectiveness. And we looked at the functions of KEMSA and realized that KEMSA has taken a greater role in that. And there's been better integration and harmonization through the various amendment bills, the issues that in post-devolution of health services, that was made a bit more complex, and therefore we considered that that is an intervention whose implementation status is still in progress. Developing an effective system for the procurement and supply of essential pharmaceuticals in disasters and emergencies. There is evidence that in 2021, we set in place an emergency supply chain framework that is in place. And the framework actually says, what do you do in an emergency? But there were some things that were not very, very explicit. And we agreed that that is work that is still in progress. And I'm aware that from the time we started doing this review to date, there has been additional progress in that area. Specialization in pharmaceutical procurement is in progress. And again, this is another intervention that had the word encourage. And we still do not have a scientific way of evaluating encouragement. So we consider that this is in progress because there are guidelines for pharmacy specialists that include people in pharmaceutical procurement and logistics. We also know that the Ministry of Health, through the Center of Excellence that is currently in Rwanda, facilitates sponsorship for specialization in health product supply chain management, and that is ongoing. KEMSA has also been able to sponsor some of their staff on issues of procurement, and therefore we scored it as being in progress. Intervention number 4 under pillar 3 talked about establishing of standards for good distribution practices, pharmaceutical logistics, and infrastructure that is to be developed all along the stages of this pharmaceutical supply chain. We know that the GDP guidelines are in place. And we also know that the Pharmacy and Poisons Board has it very clear in its strategic plan of 2020-2025. And we consider that that is in place because compliance has not been fully met. The 5th intervention in the 3rd pillar was on the issue of medicines for vet use. And as I said earlier, we were not able to evaluate this. The next was the restructuring KEMSA by statute to make it the primary public procurement agency to integrate public sector procurement. We really did consider that as per the wording of that specific intervention that had been done. The coordination of procurement of essential medicines and medical supply using the sector-wide approach. We know that there is an ICC, Interagency Coordinating Committee, that is in place, but it is wide enough that it covers all issues of HPT, not just on the issue of coordinating procurement of essential medicine and medicine supply. So whereas its work, its mandate is much broader, but it was not able to fully address the intervention that was envisioned through the KNPP 2012, and we consider that that is in progress. Collaboration between public and non-public procuring entities for EMMS, that is not done. And it was another issue where there was going to be encouragement. Outsourcing and privatization of non-core functions in public pharmaceutical procurement and supply. And these really address the issues in KEMSA. We know that transport and logistics are heavily outsourced at KEMSA, and there is a framework that has been established for outsourced distribution, and we considered that that is done. The issue of developing and gazetting zoning regulations, especially for community pharmacy, that is something that has still not been done because licensing is not done according to geographical location or zoning, and that is called 0. The fourth pillar, if we may go on, was on the area of expanding local pharmaceutical production. And I think I need to give a rider on this, that at the time of evaluation, the information that is shared here was true that date, but we are aware that a lot of progress has actually happened from that time. And the interventions were around the creating an environment that encourages investment in local production. We felt that the creation of export processing zones, special economic zones, and also the fact that the government has made some favorable decisions on the tax regime for local manufacturers has allowed us to consider that that is in progress. Compliance with the standards of good manufacturing practices. There exists guidelines from the PPB, and there is enforcement from by the PPB of the inspection of manufacturing sites. But we still know that various reports that appear in various areas during the course of implementation have shown that not all manufacturers in Kenya comply with GMP, but I know that is work that is in progress. The fourth pillar was on technology transfer. And what we found out in this is that there are pharmaceutical industries that are committed to working on the area of technology transfer and international accreditation. And however, there is no guideline that is very, very clear. It only appears in the PPB strategic plan, but there is no guideline that says how will you move from this to that. And there is a study that was done in 2015 assessing the viability of pharmaceutical technology transfer that indicated that it was not done. This was another difficult one to evaluate because it envisioned encouragement. The next one was consolidation and harmonizing all relevant statutes to ensure clarity and reduce bureaucratic bottlenecks to local manufacturing. And these especially, there have been various initiatives that have been there, but has it been done? And the answer was no, because I think the key informant interviews told us that the bottlenecks for local pharmaceutical manufacturing are still there to date. Curbing the production, distribution, and sale of substandard and counterfeit medicines, there has been a lot of progress that has been made. We know that the Pharmacy and Poisons Board has put in place a very robust pharmacovigilance system for identification and reporting. There are guidelines on safety and quality of medicines. There are post-marketing surveillance guidelines that are in place. There has been an amendment to the CAP 244 to include post-market surveillance. And there is evidence from the PPB website that there are 28 products that have either been considered falsified or substandard within the area of the time when we were checking them. And therefore, we consider that this is an ongoing process. But has it been curbed? The fact that they are still there, it shows that it is something that is in progress. Enhancing and promoting procurement. We felt that this had been covered under pillar 3, and we chose not to evaluate it under the pillar of expanding local pharmaceutical production. It was actually repeated in the 3rd pillar. The next pillar was about improving affordability of essential medicine. Again, this was a pillar that had close to 14 interventions. So it ranged from promoting transparency in the pricing structure. We are aware that there was a medicine affordability and pricing advisory committee that was put in place, and the activities were well documented, including a market price survey, and therefore we feel that that is work that is in progress. The issues of medicine prices and affordability, I think it's referred and implied, but in the KNPP, those were issues that were looked at promoting transparency and establishing a mechanism. On the issue of policy guidance on pricing structures, again, there are various draft guidelines and regulations on pricing and generic prescribing, and we were able to see them, and we felt that that is something that is in place. There is no notification process, especially for excessive increases in pricing, and the KNPP assume that that would be the function of the FDA, and that has not been done. The fifth intervention was expanding and sustaining mechanisms to provide subsidized essential medicines at primary level. And this is a place where there was a change in policy on the use of fees for public dispensaries and health centers. And we really felt it was done because people are able to access HPTs at primary care levels, that is 1, 2, and 3, at no cost to them, and therefore it was able to improve affordability of essential medicines. So everything is in place. The only problem could be availability, but it did not talk about availability. Establish effective exemption mechanisms to remove financial barriers and hinder vulnerable population groups from accessing essential medicines. And again, there was evidence that a lot has happened in this area. So NHIF is able to cover for vulnerable groups. For the poor, there were free maternity programs that have been put by a presidential decree. There were various health financing reforms that were underway that are able to address some of those. And also some specific counties have actually put initiatives that have been in place to be able to cover for the vulnerable groups, and we considered that to have been done. The issue of putting in place a mechanism for reimbursing the cost of essential medicines through health insurance. At the time we did this review, this was in progress, and we knew that there was a NHIF benefits package for that covers a lot of HPTs, and there are various schemes that were able to really look at the issue of reimbursing the cost of medicine through health insurance, and we considered that that was in progress. The issue of tax to reduce or to improve affordability of essential medicine. There is evidence that there have been a lot of initiatives over the years on the VAT Act and various exemptions that have been put in place throughout the course of the implementation of the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy. There have been initiatives to waive taxes and tariffs on pharmaceutical products, including raw materials, finished good, and packaging materials. Whereas the score that has done, I know that in the key informant interviews, there was strong opinion that that has not been done to the expectation of some of the manufacturers. Bulk procurement, we considered that bulk procurement is covered by the various acts, including the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act. Regional and pool procurement, where feasible, is in progress. There are various initiatives that are addressing that. Special populations that require special medicines to be made available. There was no evidence that there has been a specific initiative that looks at a specific population group. This has to be distinguished from what was covered in intervention number 8 and 9, where they were talking about vulnerable groups. So there are specific population groups. There was no evidence that addressed that. The issue of generic prescribing in public and private sector, there's been quite a lot of progress. And I think without exception, public institutions very largely procure by generic name. Regulations that allow for generic substitution, again, as I refer to the work for the MAPAC, it's in progress. Issues of patients' rights to allow them to make informed decision. I think, again, this was the use of the word affirm the right. So how does a policy affirm the right of a patient? Again, we felt that it was a very difficult issue that was not measurable. And but we know that there are a lot of institutions have actually made some progress, and we felt that that was in progress. The issue of the FDA gazetting a limited list of products that may not be substituted. Again, this was an intervention that was not very clear. What do you mean by a limited list of products that may not be substituted? It did not prescribe further on that, and it was not done. And the issue of fast-tracking registration of generics. Now, again, that was a very difficult intervention to evaluate because it was not very clear what it meant, but we are not able to see any evidence that there's a set criteria for generics to be fast-tracked for registration. In case of emergency, it is very clear. There is emergency use authorization, but is that considered to be a set standard for all medicines in the market? And incentive for fast tracking? Again, the key informant interviews did not give us any evidence of that. The sixth pillar, again, was very well done, and it was about promoting appropriate use of medicine. This really talked about the National Medicines and Therapeutics Committee, that is advisory to government on appropriate use of medicine. There was evidence that has been done. The ability for the National Medicines and Therapeutics Committee to collect, evaluate, and disseminate systematic data on medicine utilization. There was no evidence that that has been done, and we scored it as not done. Review and regularly update the various lists, Kenya Essential Medicines List, Kenya Essential Medical Supplies List, and the Standard Treatment Guidelines. Now, it was prescriptive. It says at least every 2 years, and that made us not to be able to score it as done because it was very prescriptive on how often it needed to be reviewed. Promote the essential medicines concept and evidence-based. I believe that has been done, and I think we really felt that that is one area where progress has been made. The pillar also talked about promoting the essential medicines concept in training programs for health workers, and I believe that is in progress. There was evidence that training programs largely have that concept as something that is taught to their students. The issue of MTCs in health facilities, there is progress. There was evidence that there are counties that have got county medicines and therapeutics committee with the membership that is done, but there was no evidence that this has been able to be used universally. The issue of MTC adopting the Kenya Essential Medicines List and the Essential Medical Supplies List to be procured. There is progress, but there are some disparities in some of the counties, and we scored that as something to be in progress. The ability to monitor therapeutic trends, it has moved from the national to the counties. There is progress, and there was evidence that there are various audits that are done by county MTCs to be able to evaluate the program, and we're able to see some evidence in published literature. Policies and guidelines that improve the use of medicines. There are various essential HPT guidelines that are developed and that are in place. We were able during this time to demonstrate that there is a national drugs formulary that has been developed, and it will constitute one of the things that we're going to share in this series. And there were generic prescription guidelines that are in place. But the ability to feed back to the national MTC, whereas there is some evidence, but it is something that we were able to evaluate as something that is in progress. Again, you'll appreciate that there are so many interventions in promoting appropriate use. It also covered the issue of promotion of human, strengthening and enforcing legislation to control the promotion of human and vet medicines. There is a lot that has been done in this area, and it was agreed that we'll have to consider that this has been strengthened, and where necessary, it has been enforced. Mechanisms for providing medicine information to help health decision makers, and it's envisioned that it was from household, community, and national levels. There have been various initiatives that have gone in this area, and we agreed that it can be able to move forward. The issue of establishing and supporting a national medicines and poison information center, we're able to note that whereas there is evidence that there is a poisons information center in Kenyatta National Hospital, this information may not necessarily, there was no evidence that there is a public confirmation that they are aware about this. 3 more interventions in this pillar was on appropriate medicine use strategies at all levels. And we're able to see, especially in the area of antimicrobial stewardship, there have been evidence that this has happened, and there has been the policy where the ministries of health, agriculture, and livestock have come together to work together to ensure that there are strategies at all levels, but that is in progress. An effective mechanism for consumer feedback, we considered the pharmacovigilance reporting system has been developed, and we scored it as done. A pharmaceutical desk within the Public Complaints Commission, the Office of the Ombudsman, it does not have a pharmaceuticals desk, and we scored it at 0. The institutional framework that allows traditional medicine activities, including research, development of regulation for traditional medicine products and their practitioners. We were able to see that there are various policies that are in draft form, and we allowed ourselves to score that as being in progress. The appropriate development and utilization of traditional medicine in such a way that it reduces risks, whereas it may not be done to the satisfaction, but there's work that is being done. However, the local production of useful and commercially viable traditional medicines for human and vet use has not been done, and we did not score it. We scored a 0 on that area. On to the 7th pillar on the issues of pharmaceutical research and development. Is pharmaceutical research coordinated that is able to enhance pharmaceutical services? The answer is no. Whereas there's a lot of research going by Cambridge and various research institutions, it may not necessarily be able to be coordinated and focus on pharmaceutical services. A medicines research database, there was evidence that there is the Kenya Health and Research Observatory that is in place, and that is a place that hopefully, if it is fully functional, we can be able to draw information from. Collaborative mechanisms for pharmaceutical research, there was evidence that there are bilateral MOUs in Cambridge and also in various Ministry of Health agencies, and therefore we said it was in progress. Increase in pharmaceutical research, including operational, and the fact that you can be able to utilize those findings. There was a strong feel that especially COVID-19 demonstrated that a lot of the research findings that are there have been actually used, and we eventually agreed that we can consider that to be done. Encourage and motivate support to health institutions and professionals to conduct R&D. There was evidence, and we looked at the KU National Research Fund and the TAM Center that is already there. and also the fact that KEMRI receives the financial allocations from government, and we consider that will score in spite of that being an encourage. Issues of bioequivalence, it's in progress, and I think we are all in the knowledge that this week we'll be given a lot of information about bioequivalence testing, what is being done in that area. The 8th pillar is on ICT, and as you remember the score, this was the specific pillar that scored highest. Regulating online sale of medicine has been done. There are guidelines that are published in the PPB website on how that has been done, and we know that that is already being done. Strategies that encourage consumers to buy medications from reputable pharmaceutical outlets. We are aware that there are still unlicensed practitioners conducting online sale of pharmaceuticals, and we consider that that is still in progress. Investing in ICT infrastructure. Now that was extremely broad, and we actually looked at how do public institutions utilize ICT infrastructure to offer public pharmaceutical services. And a lot of the processes that are listed there are on course. And we're able to list very many issues that where public institutions are investing in ICT infrastructure in various areas. The 9th pillar is on human resource for the pharmaceutical sector. Do we have a national pharmaceutical human resource strategy? There is a human resource for health strategy in the ministry. There is an internship policy in place at the ministry, but they don't necessarily fully talk about a pharmaceutical human resource strategy. And it is not well articulated on how different it is from the HRH strategy that is at the Ministry of Health. But because we know that that strategy covers all cadres of healthcare providers, we consider that it's in progress. What about legislation to recognize pharmaceutical specialization? This has not been achieved. Schemes of service, again, you'll remember that this really was earlier talked about in pillar number 1. The schemes of service for pharmacists and pharmtechs were reviewed in 2016. It was during the course of the implementation of this, and we considered it done. However, this is something that needs to happen regularly, and we considered that we put that as a note in the documentation. Recruiting and retaining adequate number of pharmaceutical personnel in public service in line with established health sector strategies, norms, and standards. We know that this has been ongoing in various ways. We know that there are HRH norms and standards to guide the health sector. We know that the health labor market analysis indicates that for Kenya to achieve UHC goals, there is urgent need to invest in HRH, including pharmaceutical staff. So we scored that as something that is in progress. The deployment of pharmaceutical personnel in the various strategies and initiatives, we considered it to be done. Expanding pharmaceutical training and capacity, it was clear that the increase in the number of training institutions and the number of personnel trained is ongoing. So we considered that has been expanded. Mechanisms to enable access by trainees from other countries. There are university exchange programs that were evidently available. The scope of postgraduate courses to meet the growing requirements of pharmacy specialists in Kenya and the region. It has been done, and there are many postgraduate courses that have come up, and there are guidelines on specializations that are available through the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. The issue of the Pharmacy Council is in progress, and I know that there has been quite a lot of feedback from the regulator on issues of national qualifications framework, and it's a document that we need to be aware about. But this mainly talked about how do people progress from diploma to degree level. And that was a concern. So we know that that has really been catered for, and there was guidance on how progression is made. There's something that is under progress by the PPB, and we consider that it is under in progress. The issue of CPD, I think that was easy to score because there is guidance by the pharmacy board on CPD, and there is an actual active portal on CPD management. Other issues talked about multilateral collaboration to allow mutual recognition of pharmaceutical personnel in the region. That has not been done. Competencies, roles, and responsibilities of pharmaceutical practitioners at all levels were able to be shown that that has been done, and there are guidelines that have been developed by PPB on evaluation and assessment of pharmacy practitioners. The public sector schemes of service defines roles and responsibilities of pharmaceutical staff, so it's called it as done. The regulation of training and practice of pharmacy, there are guidelines that are there, and the Pharmacy Council has not yet been formed that could be able to address that, but we really did score it as done. Capacity and tools for the delivery of basic pharmaceutical services at community levels. There were guidelines that are in place. And the issue of harmonization and regulation of pharmaceutical curricula, through the desk review, we were not able to score that as being done. And therefore, there is no harmonization on the pharmaceutical training curricula by various institutions. The 10th pillar was on promoting access and safeguarding public health. And this really talked about the TRIPS issues, the flexibility that we had. There was, again, this was difficult to score because it was not smart at all. Take all necessary precautions. So how do you evaluate that all necessary precautions have been taken? And we know that there are people who have utilized the TRIPS flexibilities in the area of production, procurement, importation, and sale of essential medicines. A lot of the medicines are not necessarily essential, and therefore we score that as not done. Integrating pharmaceuticals in trade policy decisions, it's in progress. There are various initiatives that are there. At that stage, there were issues of ratifying the AMA treaty. It was done after we had done this process. Issues of AGOA have been opportunities that we've used. The European-Kenya Economic Partnership has been in place, but we consider that these are in progress because there are very, very many initiatives that have been going on. The third intervention was on the Anti-Counterfeit Act to provide a definition for counterfeit medicines. Because this specifically looked at the Anti-Counterfeit Act, we were not able to score it as done. A strategy for public health, innovation, and intellectual property in line with international standards. There was no strategy that was developed, and we scored it as not done. Joint initiatives aimed at endoing negotiators at bilateral and multilateral trade fora with necessary skills was not done. There was no mechanism that we were able to find from a desk review that has been done. The country's participation in regional and international initiatives, there was evidence that Kenya has been involved in various initiatives, but it's ongoing because there are many initiatives that come up, and we scored it as something that is in progress. Again, this was a very big pillar that also talked about enhancing national, regional, and international collaboration effectively on the issues of drug and substance abuse. Now, this was something that we definitely were able to show proof that had been done by various documents that are available in the public sector. The next pillar looked at enhancing access to vet medicine, and I think I'll just state that there were changes that happened in 2015, and all the interventions in this pillar, therefore, were not possible to evaluate. And the final pillar was on finance. Mobilizing adequate finance and appropriately allocate them for effective implementation of this policy. We looked at the various strategies that have been put in place. There's a HPT supply chain strategy. There's a national forecasting and quantification that has been done. There are various initiatives that are to address the issue that donor funding is continuing to increase. Around this time, there was the FIF Acts that were actually put in place and various healthcare financing reforms, and we consider that this is in progress. Defining clear financing mechanisms for essential HPTs in the National Insurance Benefit Package. Some of you may be aware that this is work that is ongoing as we speak, but there was, at this time, there was no explicit pharmaceutical benefits package. Allocating resources for sustained public procurement. This is in progress because counties have been able to forecast their HPT needs. They've been able to use that to be able to look for additional budget allocation. But however, there's no single county that has been given adequate finances for their HPT needs. One of the interventions was abolish use of fees for key essential medicines in the public sector. I think that was very bold, but we were able to demonstrate that essential services at primary healthcare facilities are not charged to the public. The issue of mechanisms for ring fencing, government allocations for EMMS. Those of us who work in counties know that this is a continuous war, but specific counties have been able at that time to assent and implement various FIF acts. Policy guidance on medicines budget. A policy has been developed, and the revision of the essential HPT lists has been able to help that. Now, the issue of strengthening financial management and pharmaceutical supplies, we looked at all the acts that have come in place to be able to strengthen this, and we felt that that is could be able to have a score as being done. That ends my third part of the presentation, and I'm just going to share a few more slides on the key highlights from the key informant interviews. And it's very difficult to evaluate implementation from key informants because a lot of the talk and the way they'll present is based on information that they know. Sometimes this information is available in somebody's drawer and is not available in the public realm. And therefore, we have to do a very big balance on what are we going to consider to be information that you can be able to use to beef up what we had found in the desk review. But I will be able to give the highlights of the key informant interviews during our process of review. Now, what we looked at, first of all, is if we look at all the 12 pillars, how can we be able to cluster them into thematic areas to allow us to have fewer key informants, because a lot of these thematic areas can be grouped together. And this table basically tells us how we are able to look at the thematic areas and how we were able to classify the various pillars into these 6 thematic areas. We were able also to identify who the key informants are in each of these thematic areas and make sure that we have at least 40% and above of the people interviewed responding to enable us to be able to make key decisions on it. So this is a summary, and it is in the book that has been shared by PSK. The overall observations. That is how we started the key informant interviews. What did you think about this policy? There were some people who say that they will not evaluate the policy because it read pharmaceutical, and therefore it did not talk about their profession, and therefore they were not able to answer. But we realized that a lot of the people felt that the policy was well articulated, it was evidence informed, and it was futuristic in the way it looked at the various thematic areas. But a lot of people again felt that the policy was not well implemented. It was a policy that was running for an unlimited time. And the dynamics that happened during that time, therefore, allowed it not to be very, very well implemented. It was a policy that was set. Devolution came in. We had the enactment of the Constitution and very many things that changed its implementation. The first area, we surprisingly not have a lot of feedback on the area of access to HPT, finance and supply chains. However, we realized that a lot of these people answered questions in other areas and were able to look at it. On the first broad thematic area on regulation, quality assurance, and safety, I think the key informants identified the fact that a reference had been made to the Food and Drug Authority as the regulatory authority, and therefore everything else worked on that premise. The policy proposed its setup. Then it went ahead to assume that it existed and then made reference to it as the only regulator, and that becomes very challenging. It could possibly have been more appropriate to refer to a national regulatory authority that means specific about an FDA. The other feedback we got that there was a lot of noting that our regulator, the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, has grown tremendously. Its functions have also grown. It has beefed up the inspectorate, clinical trials regulation. It has addressed issues of appropriate use of medicine. It has looked at issues of financing. And therefore, one of the things that was very, very clear is that on the issue of regulation, quality assurance, and safety, the growth of the Pharmacy and Poisons Board as the national regulatory authority has been very key. We also looked at post-market surveillance, which is important for ensuring both quality of medicine, but we realized that this was a lot of the key informants said that there wasn't adequate funding for post-marketing surveillance, yet it is regarded as one of the issues that can be an indicator for a maturing regulation. On the issue of herbal products, we looked at the fact that there is no pharmacopoeia, there's limited testing capacity, there are no reference materials, there's no equipment for testing herbals, and that could possibly have hindered the ability to make progress in the use of traditional and herbal medicine. The third thematic area was the pharmaceutical industry, issues of quality assurance, and local manufacturing. Most respondents agreed that as a country, we've not attained self-sufficiency in production of pharmaceutical products and other HPTs. And whereas we've aligned ourselves to the African manufacturing plants, the level of local production that was envisioned in the policy has not been achieved, possibly due to lack of poor implementation of strategic plans. Kenya also has a GMP roadmap, but it has not been fully implemented. What was very interesting, because the key informants were telling us that a lot of countries have used the Kenya GMP roadmap to make very large strides in local manufacturing, but we've not utilized it ourselves. There are various things that came up from the local manufacturing sector, and this was especially in areas of financing. Are there affordable loans to local manufacturers? Are there concessions or incentives from the government for us to be able to do local manufacturing? that was one of the concerns, some of the concerns that were raised. If you look at the manufacturers that have come into play in the past 10 years, there have been many, but a lot of the key informants felt that there isn't enough government incentive to allow them to be well established. And our key informants felt that concessions are as important as regulation. We spend a lot of emphasis in regulations, but not giving them the concessions to be able to revamp local manufacture. We will be having another session. We will be able to talk about an assessment of the local manufacturing industry, and I think we'll go into greater depth. There was also the feel that we need to commit to purchase locally manufactured HPTs. The other area of manufacture that was talked about is on the issue of the lower lying fruits. For example, have we ever considered manufacturing pharmaceutical grade sugar or cornstarch, or even sapogenins that can be used as raw materials for a lot of the products that we use? So we really need to focus not on APIs, but on some of these excipients that we use. There was also talk about anti-snake venom. I think that mainly came from Biovax, that we have a potential to be able to manufacture anti-snake venom. But what are some of the key challenges? There were issues of intellectual property, the cost of research and development, the issues of regulatory compliance, the fact that we really depend on imports, especially for APIs, but also there were suggestions that were given by the key informant interviews on what can we be able to do to enhance local manufacturing. The fourth thematic area was ICT, and this was a place we agreed that there has been a lot of progress. Some of the legal, administrative, and regulatory frameworks for the use of ICT have been actioned upon, but possibly there hasn't been a lot of monitoring and evaluation and proper coordination to allow for synergy on the way we utilize ICT, and also to be able to therefore put costing to the achievements that we've been able to make. However, it was agreed that by all respondents that there's been a lot of growth in the use of ICT, both for management, for pharmaceutical care, and for service delivery. So universities have adopted ICT. A lot of government institutions have looked at ICT. We also looked at the Pharmacy and Poisons Board electronic system that identifies registration of both practitioners and products, and the fact that any member of the public can be able to use ICT to confirm about the registration status of a product or a premises where they are getting. But however, there are various challenges that were talked about by the key informants, including inadequate HR, inadequate research grants in the area of research and training, the heavy workload, lack of motivation, poor infrastructure. But we are also glad that we gave them opportunity to give us suggestions on how this can be addressed. The final one was not the final one. On the issue of legislation, governance, and human resource, of course, we're able to identify that training institutions have many times triple the number of graduates they enter, but there doesn't seem to be an increase in the job market. So the absorption into the job market is declining. And a lot of people shared with us what needs to be done is the training institution training, is it aligned to the market needs? Do we have sufficient qualified faculty for the curricula? Are there arrangements? Do the schools of pharmacy talk to pharmaceutical industry? to allow people to be exposed to studentship throughout the entire course of training. And therefore, they were able to share with us what can be done. On the issue of service delivery and appropriate use, a lot of the talk was about how can we be able to do accurate quantification so that we can be able to justify better budgetary allocation. Can we be able to explore pool procurement mechanisms for selected HPTs? What about equipment? Can we consider leasing and placement so that the burden of outright purchase can be reduced? The issue of transparency in the marketplace. Transparency not just for the suppliers, but also in pricing, in traceability, so that both the buyers and the users can be able to make informed choices. And one of the things we'll appreciate is that a lot of these interviews were oral interviews. We actually had to record some of them and try to transcribe them into a format that you can be able to evaluate. But I believe we did a relatively good job, and through it, we're able to actually come up with a few recommendations. There are more in the book, but we've just given 4 recommendations here on the issue of having the next policy address issues of access better so that it is contributing to social and economic development. The fact that you need to have a costed policy with an implementation framework, with a clear monitoring and evaluation plan. This policy did not have that at all. A policy that has done a comprehensive stakeholder mapping so that as it's being implemented, there is better buy-in and there is better support for implementation. And also, we really realize that overall, our policy should not have words like encourage. Good to have words, but a policy should have interventions that are smart, or a policy should lead either downwards to the development of a strategy for implementation or upwards towards legislation. I think that brings me to the end of both my voice and my presentation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Director Menge, for such a great presentation. And this time is open for participants to ask their questions. When I look at the Q&A section, Dr. I can see one question, and allow me to read it for you. It says, how was the recognition of pharmaceutical specialists, especially the non-clinical specialists, like public health, global health, etc. done? And I think we do not have another question for now. That is the main question. And this person who has asked this question is also wondering, under some of the recognized master program for supply chain, they feel that is more of an area for pharmacists to do career progression. But also asking, given that PPB is yet to allow recognition of such specialists, so it's wondering how the other non-pharmaceutical personnel, how are they recognized as specialists? That one is to you, Dr. even as we pick more questions from members. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the anonymous attendee who has asked those questions. Again, let us put it into perspective. What we are sharing is information on a situation analysis of the pharmaceutical policy. It's very easy for me to answer that question from a different viewpoint, possibly from my current responsibilities. But yes, one of the things that we need to be aware is that the Pharmacy and Poisons Board is responsible for both the recognition and the regulation of pharmacy specialties. In the evaluation, we realized that there has been no regulation of pharmaceutical specialists, but there have been guidelines on pharmaceutical specialists. Guidelines give an opportunity for input and amendment, and I believe that that window is still open because it has not reached to a place where the specialists can be identified and recognized and regulated. So I believe that all those are valid, but kindly I'll refer you to the PPB website, and in the documents, look at the recognition of pharmaceutical specialists, and they've actually put a criteria on how what is recognized and what is the process of having. Let me also just say that from my experience, I know that those guidelines have been used by a lot of our institutions to, whereas it's not yet regulated, but a lot of our institutions have actually been able to give recognition for pharmacy specialization. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. We have two more questions in the Q&A. One of them, at what point does higher diploma in pharmacy come in, both clinical and renal pharmacy, and how far is higher national diploma recognition? Kindly elaborate. The second one is asking, what is your take on compounding in Kenya, even as the practice of pharmacy continues to evolve?
I wish I would be protected from answering some of those questions. I think the first question really talks very broadly about higher diploma qualifications. And can I say that for the scope, the pharmacy specialists that were to be recognized did not include some of these higher diploma recognitions. My suggestion is always please aim higher. So if you're a pharmacist, kindly aim to be a specialist. If you have a diploma, aim to upgrade it under the current conditions. The question about compounding in Kenya, as far as I'm concerned, compounding is different from pharmaceutical manufacturing, and the policy as we reviewed it was completely quiet on pharmaceutical compounding. It was also completely quiet on extemporaneous preparation of pharmaceuticals. And I think during the period of this, there was a master's course that came up on pharmaceutical manufacturing, and possibly it is the uptake of that that then can be able to move forward. But I am aware that pharmaceutical compounding, where you make pharmaceutical preparations from APIs and other excipients, there is growth worldwide in that area. In fact, I think the American market hopes to grow that market to, by 2030, to a $40 billion US dollar market. And it is possibly an area that we need to review. But currently, I'm aware that because the primary document for pharmaceutical compounding is a prescription, then the board currently regulates pharmaceutical compounding institution as a retail pharmacy. I will leave it at that. It is actually beyond the scope of this presentation, but thank you for the question. I think it's asked by Jokabeth Kaboya. Thank you.
Asante sana, Daktari, for well-answered questions. More are coming in. One of them is speaking to the Public Procurement and Disposal Act. And Claire is wondering, how can we get pharmacists to be part of the board members of the, or they only appear in the KEMSA Act? Because this is in terms of the PPADA Act. The other question is kindly elaborate on scheme of service for pharmaceutical specialists. And we also have another question that is speaking to rational use of medicine. Somebody is feeling that we scored well in that area because of MTCs. That is more of a comment, but it's guiding us to look at the prescription data from Nyeri and other counties in terms of antimicrobial prescribing and quite irrational use of medicines there, despite us scoring well. We also have another question, Daktari. Maybe I'll first read for you then you can go. In terms of the most cosmetics are topical. Nowadays, there are oral formulations as well, if not IV, and the whole industry of aestheticians has grown as well. Are these considered in the regulation areas in this exercise? The other question for you, I'll read 4 first. So this policy designs with the DHPT. How do you see the Director of Pharmaceutical Services fitting in the structure? Number 2, how do you recommend the handling of DHPTs that pharmacists may not have expertise on? I think that one we should remove the D. It's handling of HPTs that pharmacists have no expertise on. This is an ongoing emerging issue. I think, Director, you can answer those 4, then I'll be able to highlight for you a few more.
So the first question is on the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act, and the issue was, how can pharmacists be involved? I believe that's a question that should be asked to the Pharmaceutical Society. How can we be involved, not just in the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act or board, but in very many other areas. One of the things that we've been able to do in the last few months is to try to close ranks with the Kenya Institute of Supplies Management. Some of you last week attended our very first health supply chain conference in Mombasa that was jointly organized between the Ministry of Health and the Kenya Institute of Supplies Management, and I think we're making steps. One of the basic things is we're asking ourselves, can we professionalize the role of health supply chain specialists? And that is gaining quite a lot of emphasis. And I believe that if you feel that your area is on health supply chain, there are opportunities that you can be able to work. The second issue was asked on the issue of schemes of service for pharmaceutical specialists. I just want to give a rider that the thought process of the Public Service Commission has actually moved away from schemes of service to having general HR instruments. And their main argument is this, that if they could be able to if they can be able to band together certain professionals together, and as pharmacists, we benefited from that. If we can be banded with the same scheme, let's say as specialists, health specialists, and another band for, let's say, pharmacists, dentists, and people who have similar trainings with a similar outlook, it becomes easier for them. The reason is that there has been over proliferation of professions, and there is no way that any public service can be able to adequately have enough schemes of service. So for example, if we'll have a cadre that we call pharmacy assistants, we will obligate the Public Service Commission to have a cadre for pharmacy assistants, nurse assistants. So the current thinking is for an institution to have what they call HR instruments that bands people together. Even in the current job description of job grading, there are various bands for similar activities that are banded together. So let us just take cognizance of the fact that the government no longer looks at schemes of service as a way of addressing the human resource for health issues. I do agree that it's possible that the third question of MTCs, that there have been a lot of initiatives, and we'll be able to encourage that as well. Most cosmetics are topical, I do agree that, and there are now oral formulations for that. It is for us, and the discussion we'll be having later on this week, what are the areas you want us to really address in the policy? It's possible that you don't want a policy as wide as the one that we've just had an opportunity to do a situation analysis on. But what are the broad areas? In the issue of cosmetology, do you want it to be recognized as a specialization in our area, or how do you want us to do it? So please put your questions, because in the next session, we are going to have a very open session where we are going to get a lot of input from you. Now, Dr. Mbogo has talked about the policy residing within DHPT, and how do you view the Director of Pharmaceutical Services fitting into the structure. Now, one of the things that I mentioned is that this policy viewed certain positions and viewed certain institutions as the way to go. And I say that that was a prescriptive policy. And the problem with that is that if the policy did not comply to the prescription, then did it fail? Let me go back to, for general purposes of us being aware about how the thinking of government is currently, and why do we have a Directorate of Health Products and Technologies as opposed to a Directorate of Pharmaceutical Services. The concept of pharmaceutical services has the word services in it, whereas health products and technologies looks more at the products, including medicine, medical supplies, laboratory items, and so on, that can be, and the technologies that are used to apply that. Because we've always had this struggle about the pharmacists concentrating so much on the product at the expense of, let me call it, the practice or the services. And therefore, in the current structure, the Directorate of Health Products and Technologies is to appear as distinct from the Pharmaceutical Services Unit. And we are trying to see how we can be able to address that so that the pharmaceutical services, whatever we'll call it, division of pharmaceutical services and so on, can be able to be structured and be independent of the Directorate of Pharmaceutical of Health Products and Technologies. However, in the service areas, and this is true for most referral hospitals currently, they already have directors of pharmaceutical services. All referral hospitals have got directors of pharmaceutical services. And some of the hospitals, in addition to that, also have a director for health products and technologies. Some of the counties already have directors of health products and technologies. And therefore, I want us to be able to distinguish the services from the Directorate, whereas there has to be a place where the two meet. But we are really trying to look at a way that the service providers are not held back by the product only, because there are many other services that we are to do. How do you recommend that some pharmacies may not have expertise on this? One of the responsibilities in my directorate is to be able to look at diagnostics, to be able to look at the technologies that are used, all technologies that are used in the various areas. And whereas it is challenging, I want us to be aware then that the Directorate of Health Products and Technologies will definitely have personnel that are not pharmacists only. It is not a pharmacist's directorate. So within my directorate, I've got nurses, biomedical technologists, I've got laboratory technologists, biomedical engineers, and so on. So the concept of DHPT is much, much wider, but we also need to recognize that it is something that allows us as pharmacists to, without any doubt, be the best place to head. As we develop HPT authority, or whatever we're going to call it, it is going to be all-encompassing. And most of you are aware that even currently, the Pharmacy and Poisons Board is not a forte for only pharmacists, but there are other professionals that are going to be in. We have medical doctors who are right now very interested in joining us as at the directorate. So allow me to leave it as broad as that. But pharmacists, we've also allowed openings for us to also shine in other areas. Thank you.
Asante sana for that, Director. We have a few more questions and also some comments. I'll read some comments first. There's the aspect of the access to essential medicines for orphans and vulnerable persons. And somebody feels that there is no progress that you made there, especially based on the RAMBs that you are doing to support healthcare. We also have a comment on the limited list of products that should be substituted. And there's a guide that we should do more of look at bioequivalence issues. And so we shouldn't be speaking to non-substituted medicines being published by PPB. We also have a comment on the areas of specializations of pharmacy. I think there have been mentioned several of them, from aspects of cosmetology, issues of sports medicines, nutrition pharmacies, environmental pharmacies, and all that. Very important comments. And with that, Dr. allow me to read for you 3 questions. One of them is, to what extent can we cite systemic failure as responsible for the low implementation of KNPP 2012? And what should be done to achieve better implementation for the next policy? I think that one is a good one. The other one is, I'm not sure, this from Rabera Kenyanya Biofax. I'm not sure if this was explicitly stated, but regarding the local manufacturing pillar, were the existing private local manufacturers into, that is in terms of product portfolio and challenges, and the ongoing government investments in local manufacturing considered? And finally, the practice of toxicology in hospitals as a specialty is a very noble idea through, though PPB establishes forensic toxicologists as the main consultants, are there plans to broaden this to clinical and environmental toxicologists? To you, Daktari.
Thank you, Nancy. One of the questions that I can see you wish to answer is on the issue of implementation of the KNPP 2012. And the reason that just to make people aware, Nancy chaired the process of the review, and therefore I believe she can answer the question by Dr. Ryungu as I prepare the other answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yes, I'll attempt to answer this one in terms of systemic failures in the implementation of KNPP. And in last session, we actually appreciated a few things. One of them being that KNPP was done just a year pre-devolution. And in 2013, if you look at the organogram of the Ministry of Health, there was complete scrapping of pharmacy because it was one of the highly devolved services. And for those who were there in 2013, even the aspects of TB, HIV drugs, the funds, even under global fund, were devolved to counties. It was only later around 2014-15 that the transition authority started looking at them because there were crises with the lack of availability of strategic HPT. And so that is one of the things that really affected in terms as a systemic failure. Again, we mentioned that, and perhaps contributed by that gap, the NPP was supposed to be implemented in 5-year strategic plans. And because of the challenge with the gap, even in governance, we did not get the first strategy. And it's only the 2020, after the when the division of HPT was brought in, that we were able to do the first strategy for implementing the KNPP. So yes, there was those systemic failures, and we really acknowledged them in the previous presentation. So we are hoping that in the next period, now that the directorate, we have a fully fledged directorate of HPT, should be able to implement maybe the next policy better. To you, Daktari, I think I've tried to tackle it.
Thank you very much, Nancy. And The question from Dr. Kenyanya was very explicit. The local manufacturing pillar, there are a lot of local manufacturers and product issues that were dealt with. Now, we have discussed with the PSK Secretariat, and we have agreed that because we completed a very comprehensive local manufacturing assessment that is due for, some of you have had an opportunity to look at it. We have agreed that we're going to have a session that will definitely talk about what have we seen in the local manufacturing space and what are the plans and commitments going forward and how we can be able to enhance that. So kindly allow me not to answer that, but we'll be able to give a more comprehensive session where we look at the local manufacturing landscape. And I believe that will be done in the coming days. On the whole issue of specialization, and right now, the issue of the practice of pharmacy, before we have a council, it is being heavily managed by our regulator, the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. And any desire for specialization, any feeling that you've got the numbers that allow you to be recognized as a specialist, kindly, there is a specialized, I think there's a committee that is responsible for that. I'm not so sure which specific committee, but please come together and do memoranda to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board for consideration. And I think that could be an overall area that you can be able to achieve a lot because it is our responsibility to grow our profession. So if you feel that a specific area has got the requisite skills that are required, I would ask you to kindly consider together coming through to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board as it currently exists to be able to put up your case. I will answer that generally for the areas of specialization because there are very many. Thank you. Again, I'll remind members that what we are doing in this session is a situation analysis. We had to be very, very neutral on how we look at it. I personally did not include any of my knowledge about various areas in looking at the evaluation. I had to be completely objective in looking at the various pillars that we're looking at. And again, I will encourage us, if you know something has happened and it is not in the public realm, it did not constitute something that would have appeared in the desk review. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Director. The others are more of comments, especially to our regulator, should consider beyond just approving clinical trials, but actually carrying out research, and especially at phase 4 studies. We also have another comment that to implement the next policy, we need to take, learnings from the current failures. I think those are what we have for now. We don't have another question, but members are encouraged even to ask, maybe unmute themselves and ask verbally, but this far, Director, we do not have another question.
Thank you very much. So, and thank you for the great participation. I appreciate your participation today. Thank you. Back to you, Nancy.
Asante sana. Miles, back to you.
Well, that was very insightful. I would like to thank our panelists for your expertise and the contributions we've had. At this point, I would like to recognize the presence of Dr. Samuel Nyingi, the country director at ARC, who have been able to make this possible. And not sure, Dr. Samuel, would you have a few comments or go ahead and make a few announcements? Okay, yes, Dr. Samuel.
Yeah, thanks. I think you can go ahead, Mine, just to appreciate the great presentation by Dr. Menge and again, acknowledge that we are happy to be supporting this collaboration. Yeah, back to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. At this point, I would like to just make a few announcements before we close. Just to remind everyone that this was session 2. Session 3 will take place on Thursday, September the 26th. That is this Thursday. You are encouraged to subscribe on the PPB portal and also to be able to register for the event and attend so that we can hear more from the team at DHPT. And also, this week is Global Pain Awareness Week. We have a series of webinars by Helion Health Partner. Don't miss out on that. Also, once again, you're encouraged to subscribe on the PPB portal, which allows us to dispatch the CPD points in time. We shall be having our World Pharmacist Day Family Fun Day this Sunday. You're invited together with your families. Some of the activities include leadership farewell. You understand we're in the election period. Also, we shall have a small kamukunji, activities such as a football match, swimming, games, and even Zumba. Kindly register in time to be able to facilitate the logistics and planning. South Rift branch of PSK have their annual symposium on the 5th of October. It's going to be in Bomet. And Nairobi County will be having their first health scientific conference. You're encouraged to submit your abstracts before the deadline, which is on the 18th of October. And this week on Friday and Saturday, we shall be having the inaugural Young Pharmacists Group Conference. The theme is Disrupting the Future. All young pharmacists, together with those ones who've been in practice for longer but would like to identify as young pharmacists, are all welcome. And thank you so much, everyone, for your participation, and have a great evening.
Asante.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.